page 114, and what I'm going to do is repeat the passage from last week, because this whole page is part of a single piece of teaching or thought. Very succinct. Really, I mentioned before, this is the quintessential statement of his teaching, of the direct teaching. And there's a lot in here, so if I'm going to read the whole thing, I won't go over the first part, but we'll focus on the second part then tonight. So we start at the top, and then it says, the Master said, "All of you, please listen carefully. In the future, people who are lost and confused can recognize living beings. They will find Buddha nature. If they don't get to know living beings, they could seek for the Buddha throughout endless aeons and never meet him. I'm now teaching you, recognize the living beings of your own mind. The Buddha nature is found right within your own mind. If you wish to see the Buddha, simply come to know these living beings. For it is these living beings who have lost sight of the Buddha, not the Buddha who has lost sight of living beings." It goes on. "When awakened to the essential nature, the living being is Buddha. Confused about your essential nature, the Buddha is a living being. If your essential nature is balanced and centered, the living being is a Buddha. When your essential nature deviates off course, the Buddha is a living being. If your mind is devious and crooked, the Buddha is concealed within the living being. But with one thought balanced and true, the living being becomes a Buddha. Our own mind itself holds the Buddha, and this inherent Buddha is the real Buddha. If our own mind did not have its own inherent Buddha, where could the real Buddha be sought? Your own mind is Buddha, or is the Buddha, or a Buddha. Never doubt this. There's nothing that can be established outside of this mind, for the mind gives rise to the myriad dharmas. Therefore, the sutra says, the mind aroused, and all dharmas arise. The mind stilled, all dharmas are stilled." And then he breaks off here, and he's going to follow with a closing verse. We're not going to do the verse tonight. Let's just look at this passage of text. First of all, does anybody have any questions about, it's a long passage, and you might have questions. Just clarify on this passage. Yes.
Excuse me. Kind of a question I've been thinking about in the first part, in terms of, let's say, recognize living beings. Does that include kind of interaction with living beings and, just living in community and through all the different difficult interactions and kind of learning from all those things?
What was the second part?
I guess, basically we learn from each other, basically, we see each other's, living beings outside, and we actually learn about ourselves inside as well.
He's got two layers here for this passage. One is, he first starts off by saying living beings in general, and then he says living beings of your own mind. So he's talking about living beings, for want of a better way of putting it, inside and out. Living beings are the thoughts, and he went into this in an earlier chapter. These are the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the impulses, the habitual tendencies that drive us. Those are the living beings of our own nature. And then your question is more about the first one. What does this mean to living beings generally? Do you have any feeling what he's talking about? Sometimes we have the answers to our own questions, but we're kind of hesitant to.
I feel like other living beings can be dharma mirrors, kind of like.
Can be what?
Dharma mirrors.
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 Uh-huh.
We can see ourselves, learn about ourselves through them.
Anybody else?
I was kind of putting in ego, and when he was
You were thinking ego?
Yeah, I was thinking
Meaning?
that was the inner living being.
Oh, the inner living being is the okay. And the outer? Anybody? I mean, it's an interesting line. He doesn't say, withdraw from the world and go live as a hermit. He actually says, I mean, he starts this by saying, if in the future, if people are lost and confused, if they can recognize living beings, they will find the Buddha nature. So it's almost like if you're lost and confused, your compass back is the are living beings. Whereas most people think, I wouldn't say most people, a lot of people think that the path of becoming a Buddhist or cultivation is to pull away from worldly affairs, relationships, social interactions, and so forth, that these are distractions and even outflows, and that the way you find yourself is to go to some remote mountain place or a quiet monastery where there's no other people or few people, or people don't talk much or whatever. You know, I mean, this is a kind of general impression of monastic life. If you think about monastic, I just heard an author talking about how he wrote the script for his new movie in a Benedictine Cistercian monastery. Because first of all, they have to take you in because they have a hospitality rule from Benedict. So no matter what, you knock on the door and you say, I want to stay, I'm a pilgrim. All you have to say is I'm a pilgrim. They have to let you in and take care of you. But he said it was an ideal place for him to write because nobody talked. They didn't do anything. They didn't have radio, TV, or anything. They just chanted during the day. They had wonderful food, which he appreciated. And that's the place to go, he said, to write your book. Go to a monastery. So the image you have there is sort of pulling away from, in a sense, at least the living beings outside. Now you could say what a monastery does is change your focus from the living beings outside to highlight the living beings inside. So if you come into a quiet contemplative place, the living beings haven't gone away, they're just the ones inside. And they're all very ruly and disciplined and nice and kind and compassionate. And you're smiling in the back. You realize that, there's no place to go to confront yourself than a monastery. You don't escape from the world or escape from yourself. But again, it leaves unanswered, why living beings? Why does he say that? Let's assume, of course, the living beings within, very clear in his earlier passages that these are the beings that you need to, quote, take across to transform. They are, in a sense, the Buddhas of your own nature, unrefined, uncultivated. But still, the living beings outside, why? What are living beings about? Go ahead. I mean,
just other people.
Huh?
Just other people.
Living beings includes, it's actually a complicated list in the sense that it means literally zhongsheng, which is multitude born or born from a multitude of different conditions. So it's not just people, it's the whole sentient spectrum. But that being said, let's just for the sake, the ones that we know the best are people. So again, why be, what is it about people, living being people, that are where we have to go if we're lost and confused to find our way back? Because he said, if you don't get to know living beings, you can look for the Buddha for endless aeons and you're never going to meet him. I mean, at one point, it's just radically saying whatever we think Buddha or Bodhisattva is, it is not apart from the human. It's not some transcendental other realm of existence. I mean, that's just face off what he seems to be saying. That if you're looking for the Buddha, you're looking for bodhisattvas, you're looking for awakening, there's no other place to look than in your own nature and to everything around you in the conditions of your existence. That's pretty powerful, because then what do you see when you encounter living beings? How does this become instructive? How does this become a compass back? Yeah, yeah. It's also, it could be why the text talk about studying, other texts talk about studying worldly dharmas. For example, by looking at literature, you get to see the nature of living beings in all the manifest forms of their qualities, their virtues, their vices, their tendencies, their pettiness and banalities, but also their wants and ambitions and striving. It's in that matrix that Buddhas arise or not, but they don't come from someplace else other than working with those causes that we face in our life. It's really interesting. So it means right within there you can see, for example, you can see where different choices and decisions go. You can watch somebody get addicted, and you can watch and you may not have control over that, but you can watch where that goes, and you can actually see this path with this choice, with these impulses and desires leads to this, and somebody else takes a different path. And so it's in that ground, that's the only ground we have to observe from. That's within our ground of observation. Observing Buddhas and Bodhisattvas metaphysically somewhere out there, come on. It's not something we can observe. It's not within our human experience. That's within our experience. And it seems that he's saying here is that right within the human experience, both observing ourselves and observing others, is that we have everything we need to figure it out. And we're not going to get any other special thing to figure it out through. So it's almost like the wonder and the mystery is right in the ordinary. It's right there if we know how to work with it and recognize it. It's right in the mirror, so to speak.
Martin?
Yes?
So this translation says, recognize living being.
Mm.
And to me, I really couldn't understand this passage.
Mm.
So if I think instead, if people, or if you really understand all living beings, then it seems to make sense to me. If you understand all living beings, then you see the Buddha nature. If I take it like that, then I can kind of understand. But when you say recognize living beings, it seems like when you recognize someone, it's like, oh, you are this person, that person. Sounds kind of superficial. I don't know. So I'm still having difficulty understanding.
The recognize here is the passage, recognize the living beings of your own mind, right? That's the passage. And there, the recognition of the living beings of your own mind has to do with owning them. Do you recognize the living beings of your own mind? Do you really know them? Can you spot them? Can you identify them? Can you designate? This living being is called greed. Hello. This living being is called anger. Hello. So recognition has to do with first accepting and owning up to that this is what it is. That's why recognition is a good choice of words there, because it's active. It's not, understanding can be, yes, I understand them, but recognizing means you got to actually go out and identify, do an inventory, so to speak, of the living beings of your own mind. So that recognition is it's the same thing when Master was truly recognize your own faults. Don't just recognize your own faults has to do with a discerning, penetrating look at it, honest. Understanding is more understand your own faults. From English, it's a little softer, it's a little less directive. So I think with the recognizing living beings, he's actually pushing people. Look at it, see it, call it what it is. Get actively involved.
I think she meant the previous sentence.
Say it louder, please.
I think she meant the previous sentence. Because it also says
Yeah.
other living beings.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm pushing it to, rather than understanding, which tends to be more of a vague and passive thing, he's saying really go in and recognize. Recognize the people you love. Recognize the people you hate. Understanding, again, is a little more passive. But recognizing means you're actually in there with your sleeves rolled up trying to figure out what this is about. You're working to recognize, to take note of. You can translate it as understanding if that helps you, but you have to ask, what is the therapeutic intent of this passage? And the therapeutic intent to me is to actually energize you to take charge of and engage in directly. Whereas understanding can again mean, I don't want to keep overusing passive, but it can mean just simply accepting things as they are. Whereas the recognition means get to work. That's how I would work with the English a little bit. But you can do whatever works for you. But if it gets you moving, that's the key. Yes, again?
But how could recognizing other living beings help you find your own Buddha nature?
How can what?
How could recognizing other living beings help you find
Well, that's the question he's asking. You're asking his question again. Do you have an answer?
Yes.
How would it? How would it? Do we really recognize living beings? We say we do, but often we recognize living beings through our own filter of expectations, wants, and desires and fears. We see people not as they are, but what we want them to be for us, or what we fear they're not for us. So instead of recognizing living beings, we project. And so we don't actually see living beings. When we stop projecting, all of a sudden living beings appear very differently than they did before, and they reveal the whole potential of the human. They reveal that there's fundamentally not much difference. And so the boundary breaks down, but in seeing people as they really are, you start to see the human possibility, the human potential.
So is the implication there that, for example, because I know we touched on this last week.
Louder, please, sorry.
I know we touched on this last week, and so during the course of the week, I thought about what we talked about last week, and I put it into practice. And so is the implication of what you're saying that whatever you perceive as being, so like during the transcourse of the week, I try to recognize other living beings as, you know, their true nature or whatever, but then I also recognize that there was a sense of other people just being cunning and deceiving and fearful, and so, right, and so I recognize that there might be projection going on. But so, is it that I'm only looking at their superficial nature and not looking deeper within? But even when I'm looking at their superficial nature, it still throws me off balance. It doesn't feel like I'm awakening anymore by recognizing them. Because it's still that fear that is projecting out of the interaction that I'm having with them.
If you go back, in the Buddha Charita, which is one of the accounts of the Buddha's life, at a very young age, the Buddha, it's very wonderfully described, it's almost like passively without projecting, just looks upon the world, sees people working in the fields, soldiers going off to war, the animals toiling, tilling, people being born, people aging, sick, and dying. And he observes, he recognizes this whole thing, and by recognizing, including what you're talking about, the pettiness, the fighting, the cunning deception, and also the acts of kindness and generosity and whatnot. And he sees in that what life is. He sees it for what it really is, and by seeing it for what it really is, he actually, on that basis, brings forth the resolve to seek awakening, to seek to understand it very, very deeply, because this is what it's made up of. And everything goes this way or goes that way. He's watching the dynamics as they unfold. And yet in the process, overarching that is this sense of they're born, they dwell for a while, they age and they die, and this massive circus almost of activities just goes on and on and on. And it's right in those details that he brings forth his resolve to figure things out. He is recognizing living beings. He's recognizing what's going on. And from that recognition, without projecting and saying good or bad, right or wrong, I want or don't want, he's almost impartially observing and just saying, whoa, I recognize this, and now I want to figure this out and just not be caught up in it completely. So by recognizing living beings, you watch somebody do something you feel is disreputable or cunning or whatnot, but therefore X, Y, Z go you, you know? And so you can actually see and you understand what motivates, what moves. And then that understanding, that recognition and understanding then leads you to the possibilities of rising above a little bit, just impulsively going along and trying to get some handle on this. And it's not that you look at living beings with a sense of criticizing or judging, nor of excusing or rationalizing, but almost clinically, like a doctor would look at data coming in and saying, here it is how it works, and then you start to reflect on where am I in this? In what ways am I being also carried along by similar desires and impulses, even though I think mine are better than yours and so forth. But looking at it objectively, you understand what drives people, what inhibits people, what exalts the human. And in that, you understand where sages come from. You also understand where demons come from, because it's all along a spectrum of working with the human, working within that realm. So in a sense, you're studying the nature of how things actually work, both in yourself and others. And from that understanding, you start to get not just knowledge, but insight into, and questions arising about where is this going, what's this about, is there a way to take some charge of this, or simply just be pulled along? But it's not by, you can't escape that, it's by mastering that you get the awakening, rather than trying to push it away, push living beings away, or push the living beings of your own nature out of your purview. I don't know if, so it's kind of like, it is from the human. I mean, he has an earlier thing, he says, looking for Bodhi apart from the world is like looking for a rabbit with antlers. It's right here within the worldly conditions we're living in. But the thing is, do we recognize them? If we don't recognize them, we're just sort of going day to day, repeating the same things, calling this that and that this, and never really understanding the deeper dynamics at work. So the recognition has to do with almost a stepping back and watching the thing work and understand how this cause leads to that effect, which leads to that, and getting some understanding of it. And this is not something you get from reading the New York Times or online material. It's a reflective, deeply reflective process. I think for it to work, judgmentalism has to stop, because judgmentalism is just another form of arrogance, and arrogance is the same thing. You don't see things for what they really are. You see them as distancing yourself from it. So it's really funny, the kind of judgmental or arrogance, that attitude keeps you from recognizing it, and you feel, I alone am sane, others are crazy, I alone am pure, others are defiled, but there's no recognition there. There's just simply a judgment, and in effect, you're freezing your recognition possibilities because you've now isolated yourself into this bubble of can't be touched. Yeah.
How do you stop judging?
How do you stop?
Yeah, sir.
Anybody who stopped it, please.
Yeah.
Please speak up and tell us how you did it.
So Mati, can we also say then, you recognize how multitude of living beings arise, something like that? Because you said how things work.
At the very simple level, at the very simple level, every living creature. When I was young, I'm digressing a bit, but not too far. When I was young, one of the books that inspired me, it was maybe in 6th or 7th grade, and I read the autobiography of Albert Schweitzer. And you know who Albert Schweitzer is. He's a famous German. I think Schweitzer won the Nobel. He was a German doctor and a wonderful Bach organist. And when he was younger studying, he realized that he came up with his famous statement of life. He said, I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. And he developed in his concept of reverence for life based on that. And he went off and he started a hospital in a very underserved area of Africa, and that's where he spent, even though he could have been at the height of his life in Europe as a doctor, he was so skilled. He did that because he wanted to serve life. He wanted to, and he said, where's life most endangered? Physically. And so he went there, and that really inspired me. But at the same time, I had the thought, and so this is what I means to recognize. Until I read that, I didn't recognize, oh, the ants, the mosquitoes, the rabbits, the deer that the men go out and hunt in the fall. These are all forms of life that will to live. And I'm in the midst of life that wills to live. Why don't I recognize their will to live equally as mine? And so for me at 5th or 6th grade, that was an eye-opener, that I'm in the midst and I have the same thing. So the recognizing of the living beings came from that. At the same point, I didn't express it then, but I had an equally thought, but I am life that's bound to die in the midst of life that's bound to die. And so I was like, well, okay, so this balances that. What do I do with that? And I look around me and I see nobody's avoiding that. So even though everything wills to live and wishes to live, and I wish that to be respected in me, don't stomp on me, equally I'm enjoying then to not do it to others. But what about this other thing? I am life that is bound to die in the midst of life that is bound to die. That's also a recognition. And eventually that led me to this kind of material. But that's what I mean when you said the simplest level. I'm saying, what does it mean to recognize living beings? It's to recognize that fact. Not only do all living beings come into existence, go and pass away, I too am in that. And that just basic recognition. Now that's like kindergarten. And yet, really, if you think about it, most people, day to day, don't have that recognition.
Well,
Isn't that... You asked the question, how do you get rid of judgmentalism? At the same time, something as simple as that, of knowing that I should equally respect all forms of life, just like I want them to, we don't do it. We precious, my precious this, and that's all negotiable. You're all negotiable. But the same thing is, do we actually recognize, except at dramatic moments, that right in the midst of that, we are bound to die as our other forms are bound to die. Those recognitions, and this is maybe what I'm going, is recognition means you take things as they are and you work with them. But if you don't recognize them, you live in a bubble of illusion. You know, the death, it's not here, it's not pressing. You know, I can, you know, take care of myself, but I don't have to take care of others. We live in but that's not a real recognition. So I'm sort of saying, if you really, what the text seems to be saying, if you look like the Buddha looked at human existence and said, no matter how much you invest in it, it's still on this trajectory to go and to disappear and to end, and what are we to make of that? That is the recognition. And it's a kind of, I'm doing this, I'm rocking on my pillow here. It's not like, oh, that's nice to know. No, it's not nice to know. It's disturbing to know. And it's from recognition comes at a certain amount of what I call constructive disturbance that allows you to get off your cushion, or I'm just using it as a metaphor, and actually engage these things. That's where recognition is different from just like, I understand. You got more questions?
Yeah.
Boy.
So like, okay, so say, so like with me, like
I'm running out of answers, but go ahead.
like you're saying to see it as it is. Like,
It's what?
so you're telling us to see it as it is.
I'm not telling you. I'm saying the text is pushing us in that direction.
To try it in the real world, like
The real world? What's the real world?
reality, like a construct of reality.
What I just mentioned is not the real world? That I'm life to live and I'm bound to die? That's not the real world. So what is it? The mall's the real world? Or iPhone's the real world? What's real? If that isn't real, you think you're going to live forever?
No,
You think you're not? So isn't that the real world?
I'm confused.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, we throw things out like this and say the real world, and I go, gosh, you know, what world, is there another world that one can live in besides the real world?
Expectations in fantasy, and then there's like how things really are, and then
There's what?
expectations and fantasies in my own head.
Yes.
And then like when I enter the real world and see how conditions really play out, and it like, you know, is how things really are, and it causes.
But see, you're not in the real world then, right?
Well, then I'm entering the real world when I see it as it is, and it causes friction. And my next
Duh.
like, what do you do about friction? How do you like see?
Well, that's what I'm saying. How do you avoid it?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, well, that's what the Buddha started with. I don't know. But then he sort of looked at it and said, I don't think it's avoidable. If the Buddha said, here's the escape mechanism, we wouldn't have any of these teachings. We'd just do the escape mechanism. He really wanted to do what you're asking. I don't want to look at this crap. I'd like it to be, and he couldn't. Because no matter how closely he looked at it, no matter what toy he picked up, no matter what you call what? Vanity and... Huh? You just use vanity? Huh?
Oh,
Fantasies, vanities, the whole thing. No matter which one he took up, the real world came bouncing back at him. No matter how much television, how much sex, how much wine, how much partying he had, the real world wouldn't go away.
Like, how do you deal with that?
You don't. Of course, that's what I'm saying the recognition implies. Let me ask you, let me ask you another question. How do you not deal with it? How do you not deal? Since that's real, okay, how do you not deal with reality? Instagram. YouTube. And so in the verse that's coming, he says, if you can, tune into Facebook and Instagram. You need not cultivate. You will become a Buddha instantly. Instagram. No, seriously, we ask these questions, but the reality is whatever we think is ending this suffering is in fact prolonging it because we're not facing reality. So when parents tell you, no, get ready for the real world, you say, whoa, yeah, let's talk about the real world. They don't want to talk about that real world. They want you to get ready for the make-believe world. Well, good if that works, but eventually the make-believe world, because it's make-believe, will evaporate. It can't hold. There's nothing to it. I mean, many, many cultivators in the past, not just Buddhists, have tried to escape reality and have not succeeded. If there was a way to escape reality, believe me, I don't know about you, I'd take it at an instant.
No, my question is, like, how do you make, like, seeing things as they really are easier? Like,
Ibuprofen?
How do you transition from, like, this being hard, being just harder?
Why is it hard?
No.
No. It's hard because you don't want to accept them for what they are. Because you have in your mind, it's not easy or hard. It just is as it is. Do you know what I mean? When you say, how do I make taking reality easier? It's, what? How do I make gravity less pressurized?
Marty, I mean, it seems like a lot of the, what I hear from in a lot of the discussion is a desire to understand, a desire to judge, a desire to, make sense of things, that arrive at certain conclusion and so forth. And I think what's interesting is that in this text, the only thing that's emphasized here is simply to observe with curiosity.
It's what?
Simply to observe with curiosity. Simply to, right? I mean, what's the word? Where you just recognize, the act of recognition, in my mind, is one of observation and curiosity.
Certainly curiosity is a motivating factor. And in a sense, if you are really curious, you will start to look and look and look. What she's talking about is curiosity then leads to insights that make it hard to accept things for what they really are. Therefore, how do you move it so it's more easy?
To accept.
But making the insight is already a judgment.
Maybe what?
The act of having an insight is to make a connection. A connection is to presume a connection, as opposed to simply a reading of the situation, an observation of the situation.
Well, between the observation and the reaction comes a judgment, a desire, a wish, and that's what's intruding. In other words, if you already have a preset that says, I want to not be caught up in the reality that I see everything caught up in, coming into being, getting old, decaying, and passing away. That's not pleasant, right? Right. And that's not easy to accept. But right away, the not easy to accept is adding a desire on top of the reality. If you could, in fact, impose on that reality, your desires, go for it. If in fact the reality would be altered by your desiring or wanting it to be different, there'd be no reason not to do that. But the unfortunate fact is that desire doesn't change it. Wanting it to be easier is actually coming from a wish not to accept it as it really is. It's already not taking it straight on.
So the reality that Connie is...
The what?
Reality that Connie is referring to is something like death, old age, and sickness closing in on you from all four directions.
Not me, on you. However, I want to point out that accepting reality is also accepting this incredible potential you have. When the Buddha, when it said recognize living beings, it's to recognize also there's this incredibly powerful, whole and complete, awesome energy called awakening that you also have. And if you don't recognize that, you're also not dealing with reality. So it's not just the negative and saying, oh, life sucks and suffering and you're going to get old and you're going to die, but also the recognition is there's something else. You could call it curiosity, but it's this wish to know. It's a desire to really understand, and this is compelling and positive. So it's not simply because you're born only to age and die, but you're also born with this incredible potential. How do you perfect your humanity? So this is a question of recognition. It's to cherish yourself as well as not to be deluded by, vanities. But to say, if I just face that, there's nothing, that's also just a judgmental negativity. You're imposing a negativity on that. It's to say, how do I free up my potential? When he says, how do you become this fully awakened? You've lost sight of it. You've lost sight of it. Oh, that's interesting. He's actually saying losing sight is to not recognize. You've lost sight of your nature. So then the question is not just to use the negative, but then also to tune into what is your potential? What are you capable of? When getting rid of all of these afflictions and attachments and so forth, it's not like you lose. Something is now really powerfully liberated, and that's also recognition. So you're both recognizing your Buddha nature, and you're also recognizing the illusory tendency. They go hand in hand. Yeah.
So it sounds to me like, because that was the extent of my question as well, but it sounds to me like when we add a desire for things to be easier, that we're also adding more of an illusion to whatever is happening, right? And so if we then...
The world is making...
No. So like so if we want to make things easier, if we want to make the suffering easier, then it sounds to me like we're adding another layer of illusion, right, to whatever is happening. And if I hear that correctly.
Well, again, this is very interesting. What does easier mean? What does it mean?
Like, easier to accept things as they are.
Huh?
Because like right now, like I feel like for us to accept things as they are, there's a lot of internal friction or reflection. But
see, I would argue the opposite.
Huh?
I would argue the opposite.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you're used to it. That's like.
Well, wait a minute.
You're basically asking how do you get to that point where it's like.
What I'm saying is, there's expressions here talked about easy. It's called zudzai, da zudzai. Great ease, great comfort. And you think, how did they do that? Instagram. No, they didn't do it. How did they get the ease? This is a question. What does it mean to be easy? What does easy feel like? What do you mean by easier? When do you feel really at ease?
Going with the flow, like you said, accepting peace.
When does that feeling come about? When do you feel like, wow, this is good? I feel it. And you do observation. You recognize, when I do this and do this, I feel ease. When I do this and this, I don't feel ease. And if you're being honest in that process, you will eventually get to easy. So I'm arguing that what we call easy may in fact be difficult. And what we call difficult may be, in fact, real easy. There's a famous line from, again, the Tao Te Ching, which some of you, I've encouraged you to read. It says, many small easies, many easy easies, in the end, big difficulty. Many small difficulties, in the end, big ease. And so it's like, instead of just yielding to, oh, I don't want to face that, or that's unpleasant, squaring off with a little bit, cultivating yourself a little bit, actually things get easier.
Yeah, like how do you cultivate that?
How do you do that?
Yeah. You let go. Like in your mind.
Say?
I just say letting go, because you realize that the more you grasp, the more suffering it is. The more you want, the more you desire, you can never get that. But it's by only through letting go that you get that easy feeling. But we refuse to let go because we're so habituated to grasping. But even if you just let go a little bit, there's that much ease.
So it really comes down to like psychological, like, or is mental, like, is it all mental?
Everything's made from mind alone. Gee, where did that come from? Yes, it does come down to the mind. But her point is very interesting, because there's a kind of paradox in this teaching. Remember the verse I quoted you that we had living beings grasping everywhere. That's what you're looking at living beings. Look how they're grasping everywhere. My living beings of my nature are grasping, and living beings are grasping everywhere. And the second line says, living beings grasping everywhere cover over the wondrous, cover over the great ease, the great fulfillment, the great wonderness. Let go, release your hold, the wondrous revealed. Those are the 4 lines. It doesn't say grab more or grab faster. So going back to her point, the paradox is by letting go the grasping, the desire, the kind of nervous anxiety that makes you want to get that, letting go of that, which is psychologically chilling a bit and turning off the flames a bit. Look what's happened. Pretty cool. Something came in that's pretty kind of nice and wondrous. Let go, release your hold, the wondrous revealed. But the wondrous can't come up because you're covering with frantic grasping. And that's why he says a frantic passage through life ends in bitter regret. And if you look at how we do it, and you think, well, as you get old, you get less frantic, bull. I watch people as they get old, they get more frantic. They pack in more vacations, more travel, got to go here, got to go there, until they drive themselves sick with trying to grasp and cover it, because now I'm getting older, I have to grasp more and faster. Even Confucius said the thing with aging is that age is a time of massive accumulation, of hoarding. Why do people hoard when they get older? Because they just want to, if they grasp enough, they'll avoid it. So I'm just, psychologically, you're right. This is really about very profound psychology.
But it's also not just psychology, because as soon as your mind relaxes, your body relaxes. You have all the tension that you're holding. So it's not just a psychological thing. It might start from the thought, but it doesn't end there. It actually has a profound effect throughout your whole life.
But until you taste that flavor, you're not going to be convinced. I wasn't. But I'll tell you now at 72, my life's pretty easy. And at 17, it wasn't. So what happened in between? I ate, drink, and be married. No, but that's why you also recognize, you also look to people and ask, where does this path lead? Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, you look to people that are walking in front of you and ask, where is this going? Who do I see that's at ease or happy or not? And what do they do to get there? This is to recognize living beings, is to take note. Right? That doesn't mean you can just imitate, but it gives you some kind of way of judging where you might be stepping. Right? And the only thing is, most of your steps can be corrected. So even if you misstep, by misstepping, you learn true stepping. You don't learn balance except when you get off balance. Now there's some steps that are rather final stepping off a cliff. It's hard to correct that. But, and I'm using a metaphor, I could be very specific what I mean, but I'm just saying there's some things that you do that you can't really reverse. You can reverse your major. You can even reverse marriages. I know you said you vowed you'd never part, blah, 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 but you can reverse it, right? There's a few things you can't reverse, so you should be really careful what those are. But other things, figure it out, figure it out. Listen to yourself, figure it out, feel it out. Where are you getting comfort and ease? Figure it out, figure it out. That's all he's talking about here. When he's talking about cultivation, he doesn't say just follow, feel, observe, be aware. When I do think, feel, say this results, I was going to share with you a passage tonight. I'll just share this passage. The other part I'll save because it's from the Avatamsaka, it's a little longer, but this one was about this last line where he says, the mind aroused, then all dharmas arise, the mind stilled, all dharmas are stilled. There's nothing outside. That's your point that you just made. It's psychology. There's nothing outside of this mind. As your mind goes, your life goes. As your thoughts and your feelings, your impulses go, your life goes. So this is actually, this is from Hui Neng, it's a Sixth Patriarch, but you find it in the earliest of teachings. This is the Dhammapada. You'll find it in the Four Noble Truths where the Buddha says, know for yourself. Figure it out. Know for yourself. And you find in the Avatamsaka, just do the Dhammapada tonight. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. And by think here means impulse, feelings, emotions, and not just ideas. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. Second passage, our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves. These are the opening lines of the twin verses of the Dhammapada. And in both of those you see that what we call our life is not something fixed, but is rather indeterminate in the sense that it's dynamically unfolding as we choose and act and react. I mean, people say, well, what's the meaning of life? It's not like it's abstractly decided. It's something that you either determine through what you're doing. So is life suffering or joy? It depends on what you're doing, not that it's predetermined to be one or the other. This is what the Sixth Patriarch is hitting on tonight. He's just saying, pay attention to you and what you're doing and observe cause and effect. What you think, what you want to, it's sort of like, why am I the way I am right now? Genes? With a G, not a J. Genes? Fate? Cosmic rays? What the text is saying, you want to understand what you are right now? You are the fruit of your previous thoughts. You want to know what your previous thoughts were? Look at what you are now. You are exactly mirror image of what you thought previously and did on the basis of those thoughts. Wow. That's really interesting. So you think about analysis. You want to analyze, why am I ill at ease? Why am I not happy? Why am I judgmental and so forth? You sort of look at, trace them back. You reverse engineer, so to speak, and say, okay, this is where I got the thing. How did this thing come together? Not by magic, not by mystery, not by God. I put it together. Oh, I made this machine. Whoa, let's look. Oh, here's where I had that thought, that feeling, that. And there I am now. And then the text says you want to know what your future is. Look at what you're doing right now. Because what you're doing right now is basically the groundwork, the causality basis of what's going to emerge. It's not magical. That's what it means to recognize. To recognize is to see how causality is very much close at home in what we're doing, thinking, and saying right here and now. And none of that is fixed or fated. It's dynamic. So it can always be changing, but without reflection, there's no change. There's just habituation, which is the word that she was using. The habituation just drives us along. As far as curiosity, I can remember my teacher saying, you're not curious enough, which is something to think about. Deep curiosity leads to deep insight. stopping short on curiosity or trying to control it then leads to a kind of skimming the surface. So if one's really curious, you basically end up walking the same path the Buddha walked. Not because he was a Buddha, because he was so curious that he couldn't avoid these questions. And by pursuing them, until he didn't give himself any escape mechanism at all. Anyhow. Wow, well, I didn't do anything I was planning on tonight. We were going to go into that. I just simply asked anybody had any questions or whatnot, and we went down another rail. So we'll pick this up again next week, and maybe some of the stuff I had to share tonight I'll share with you next time. So now I don't ask if there's any questions, because it's already used up. You don't have any more, do you?
No, right now.
Okay, not right now.
For tonight. Thank you.
But the other thing I would say to you is what you can take away from this is to trust yourself. Is to really, and they use the word faith, but there's 3 types of faith or trust in these teachings, to have some faith or confidence in them. The teachers, not necessarily me, but the teachers that have passed along these teachings, but primarily and fundamentally have faith or trust in yourself. Because without that, you can't really enter this arena we're talking about where you can observe it. But if you have trust in yourself and you say, I'm going to be more critical and hold myself to a higher flame than I even do my parents, you will be okay. Because as a child, my parents and my teachers, boy, I was like razor sharp looking for any possible hypocrisy, inconsistency, or whatnot. I was like Sherlock, you know. You said I was supposed to, but you just... And if you take that mentality and apply it to yourself, you will penetrate. You understand what I'm... Yeah, so like, trust yourself and also don't give yourself any room, wiggle room. Okay. Any announcements? How did this start? You started it with your question. Did we answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah?
That's very deep.
So Mati, you can say between age 17 and 70, what happened? And then answer is recognition.
Well, between 17 and 70, a lot can happen or nothing can happen. There's people I know who died at 17 and weren't buried till they were 70. Okay? And there's people who were buried at 70 and whose minds and hearts were like 17. Okay? So it's not about age so much. And there's a great passage, I won't quote you, from Confucius when he said, I was 15, and when I was 30, and when I was 45 and 70. But he described going from difficulty to greater ease until in the end at 70, he said, I could follow my heart's desires and not err. I was just fully happy. And it describes a process of working through, observing, reflecting, recognizing that he got to there. But there's other people who don't do that, and as they get older, they get dumber and they hurt more. And I'm not just talking about physical ailments. So age does not necessarily confer wisdom or happiness. So what happened in between? That's a good question. But I would say don't wait till you're 70 to sort of figure out that. My teacher's thing I'll share with you was really hit me at the time when we were doing the bowing pilgrimage. Because it was such a long span, and we were only doing less than a mile a day, and we had hundreds of miles to do. And when you do that, you're kind of like, oh my God, I'm looking ahead at the map, and we're only down in Malibu, and we're going up to Northern California, and the mind just goes, the rain, the weather, the food, everything is looking, and then you're thinking, I've only come this far. And he came out one day and he said, I'll tell you the secret. He said, don't look ahead and don't look behind. Just attend to the here and now. And he said, make sure that every step you take is true. Don't, and if every step you take, as you're about to put your foot down, if it's true, and you know it's true, eventually everything just starts to work out. So make sure that every step you take is true, right on. And by true, I mean true to yourself, as well as true to the larger reality. That's what it means to be in Dharma, to be truly in yourself as you really are, and things as they really are. And if you're true, you will actually, without you knowing it, by the time you reach 70, you won't even know how you got there. So it's like, pay attention to the here and now, because that's the only place we have to operate from. It's the only place we have any power whatsoever. The rest of it is just out of our control. Don't make plans, just attend to the true. You can make vows, just don't make plans. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so tomorrow we have 7:30 Avatamsaka lecture, and we'll continue our investigation with Dharma, with Rebbe Hengscher, who will be connecting with us from Australia. And what else? And Wednesday, Stephen Tainer class, 7:30, as always. All classes are starting 7:30 p.m. Thursday night, Inside Meditation Community, and Friday we'll meet again, hopefully.
You know, I'm just thinking, like tonight, are we going to get through this before the end of the semester?
Don't think about it.
Very good. Touché. We'll do the transference.
Our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. Bid people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate